even if you don't have a possessing facility, but you have employees that are doing classified information processing, even at government sites, they might not be a threat to your insider network, but they're a threat to all of ours, if you think of it from a taxpayer perspective. Welcome to It's Fine, the podcast where we tackle complex challenges facing businesses today with a blend of expertise and practical insights. I'm your host, Matt Treiner, and this week we're delving into the critical issue that affects small to medium businesses, insider threat mitigation strategies. Small businesses often find themselves at a disadvantage when it comes to managing insider threats. Unlike their larger counterparts, they may lack the extensive resource needed to implement a comprehensive program to detect and prevent insider threats effectively. However, fear not, as this episode is here to provide invaluable insights and strategies to help bridge that gap. Joining us today are two experts in the field, AJ King, Hunter Strategies Chief Information Security Officer, and Joel Cabrera, our Security Operations Lead. With their wealth of knowledge and deep understanding of cybersecurity challenges facing business of all sizes, they'll shed light on the effective insider threat mitigation strategies specifically tailored to small to medium enterprises. So whether you're a business owner, an IT professional, or simply curious about cybersecurity best practices, sit back and tune in as we explore how small businesses can navigate the complex landscape of insider threats with confidence and resilience. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
You make us sound really cool. I don't think we're that cool. Joel might be, but I'm definitely not.
Yeah, we'll go with that one.
So while I don't want to suggest that people should start with insider threat mitigation, I think it's probably important that we set the table that insider threat's important, but there's lots of small businesses that still don't do MFA, still don't have telemetry or other things. So I think it's important that we put this episode in the context that once you feel like you have a reasonably mature engineering posture, how do you start overlaying logical programs like insider threat intelligence?
I really just want to come in here and just say, don't let a single person have all the keys to your kingdom.
Look, separation of duties is really important in mitigating totality of threats, but especially when you're in defense and it's not just about compromising your whole environment. Any individual bit of cooey that's given to you, you have a legal responsibility to protect, even if you don't have a possessing facility, but you have employees that are doing classified information processing, even at government sites, they might not be a threat to your insider network, but they're a threat to all of ours, if you think of it from a taxpayer perspective. So agreed. I'm not saying that I disagree, but I'm saying that I'd like to get to some of the more nuanced and early warning indicators that I think can help firms kind of view both for their own infrastructure and the infrastructure that they're charged to protect, like their customers, be it government and classified or a bank and something financial or something else, where they might know that coming to work at Hunter, even if you rob us blind, you're not set for life. We're not that big of a company. But many of our customers, if you manage to rob them blind, you'd be doing well in several generations thereafter. It's not just insider for yourself, but your potential for being an insider to somebody else.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, right? Depending on what kind of SMB you are. I was recalling the IONS tech briefing this week with Jake and Mandy, and they were talking about how APT organizations are increasingly targeting individuals, but the way that they're targeting individuals is they're going after third parties, right, that may have touch points into that individual's lives, right? So if you think about an SMB, they called this out specifically on that particular episode, was hospitality industry. And if you are in espionage or an advanced persistent threat, how attractive it is, right, if you're targeting a specific individual to go and hack into Marriott and to see where is that individual going, where are their staying? How long are they staying there? Where are they going regularly? And so to your point, Matt, any individual bit of information there is valuable. So the average Motel 6 owner, right? Not saying that highly important people go and travel to Motel 6s, but it's a great example. What are the strategies that they have to help protect against their insider threats, helping facilitate that? One of the other things like we saw last week that I think we posted in one of the Hunter channels as well was the first sentencing of an individual that was a manager at I think it was a T-Mobile store or Verizon store. I can't remember which one it was. They were being paid $1,000 to go and perform SIM swaps. So the gang would come in, they would pay the manager the $1,000, he would SIM swap the targeted individual, and away they go. And he would get a percentage of their profits as well. If you listen to Darknet Diaries as well, that's another great example of why we talk about things like don't use SMS-based MFA or supercritical processes for that very reason. Kind of went around about in the circle there. As we started talking about baseline strategies, I think Joel hit the nail on the head to start with. If we're talking about prevention, or are we talking about detection? protection. And at least initially talking about how do we prevent insider threat or make it a higher bar would probably be a way to start. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I would say, because we're specifically trying to target small to medium businesses, so what are actionable things that people like that can do that are fundamentally going to be resource constrained from any number of angles?
Sure. I will talk about it from a Google perspective, at least initially. I think about a lot of SMBs have Google tenants that are out there. And Joel, if you want to hit on it from a Microsoft perspective, one of the cool things is Google publishes some really, really nice checklists for hardening of your environments, right, as it relates to workspaces. And I would say that's the number one thing that I would be targeting, would be going through your main collaboration platform, whether it be Office 365 or Google. Are there other choices besides those nowadays? I don't think there are. You could have Slack, but standalone, and you could have like Valley Mail or something. Come on. No, it's not a suite. But like you go through your main platform, right? And you follow these checklists, and it's things like making sure that users can't set up and authorize new SSO apps into the environment they want to connect into that you haven't approved. Again, data egress outlook point. So that's what I would start with, though, would be hardening your environment. Some of the big things is making sure that shared credentials are not in place. How do you do that? Well, lots of ways. One, manage your service accounts as much as possible. Force things like MFA on all user accounts. If I'm an insider and I want to become the CEO of Hunter Strategy, and I somehow manage to figure out, observe, or guess Matt's password, if he has MFA in place, that it doesn't matter. There are lots of things from a hardening prevention perspective that we can do. I don't really think that we should go checklist item by checklist item because they can all see that. But that is where I would start with, would be harden your workspace environment. Joel, thoughts on that? Or
Yeah, I do like that. And as far as like the perspective of Microsoft, being able to say like my productivity tools are assigned to a licensed account and all of that is being logged, it's making sure that people aren't using that account as also the account that manages or operates as the administrator of the environment. You're not making it perfect, but you're limiting the path forward. You now have a specific like, hey, this account is the one that's doing it, right? So you have like that kind of defined guide rails. And also just like what Adrian was saying about Google, right? Like you have your secure score, you can go and make sure that you have adjustments and policies are put into place and logging and all of that. Honestly, like Microsoft does a really good job at, I'll say this as saying like a lot of the security features that are really easy and very well put in place are on cheaper, lower end of the licensing pool.
so you're saying foundational elements basically are out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, you can put all of your alerting. And as anyone who can go and define what their crown jewels are, as a small company, you can say what's really important. The way that I designed this one product, that's super important. Okay. How restrictive do you want access to be? No one but myself should access it. You're basically putting canaries all around it to make sure that you kind of are aware that if someone reaches it.
It's funny you mentioned canaries because that's one of the things that I had as a note here when we talk about detection is putting a canary file on the network basically would be something like annual salary report or something that you know only you should access, and you closely monitor that for other people accessing it. Canaries are definitely one way to do that. I liked one of the things you said. I'll be the first to say here, I prefer Microsoft over Google because Microsoft makes it easier on an SMB to know exactly what to do. How do they do that? They do that in the security center. You can literally load in the security center, go to the Microsoft Secure Score, and as someone that doesn't know anything about security, you can click and follow the documentation and links to implement the things that you need to implement to harden your environment to a baseline standard. Google does not have that. You have to either use outside tools. They have nice hardening checklists that you can follow, but it is much more technically involved and much harder to find than the Microsoft work.
Maybe you clarified that because I was going to say that they do, but then you said like it's the hardening style. And I'm like, okay, you're right. They are fundamentally different lists that are being utilized in both spaces.
And the thing that I like is that when you're in the security center, you click the finding, it takes you to the documentation or the spot in the portal that you need to modify to do it. Maybe Google does, I don't know. I've only been through that a few times on the Google side, but it doesn't have as nice of an interface to me or as easy to do on the Google side. One of the things that you mentioned as well that I wanted to call out as a key difference between Google and Microsoft, and again, to me, why I lean the Microsoft path here for SMB is because I can use Defender. Having Defender integrated into your endpoint and Intune, the suite of tools as it relates to the Microsoft stack, in my opinion, is so much more friendly to creating a secure secure environment than a Google environment. You're going to be operating on a Windows workstation anyway. You have to go out now and purchase a third-party EDR solution, a third-party endpoint management solution. It is much more cohesive and simpler for an SMB owner to stay in that space, figure all the things, use Intune, use Autopilot, use Defender. How does that matter for insider threat mitigation? Well, that means that Defender is now sitting on your endpoint, collecting any telemetry that you may need, in addition to all the policies, the prevention, the visibility, the integration into the various other tools within the Microsoft platform. To me, it's just a much more easily and well-observed ecosystem.
I would agree with that. As someone who is kind of doing an SMB, I'm not doing it, my wife is. I'm kind of supporting that, and I'm using that by using Microsoft myself and kind of doing from the ground up, being able to stand out. It's been fun being able to do that and realize how many things just kind of work together just because you pay a specific licensing cost. If you're looking at like 30 to 60 people, right, that we'll never hit, getting a lot for it.
Yeah, and let's talk through some of the specific pieces of the different tools. Regardless of whether it's Google or Microsoft, these things stand true. So things I would think about would be like data labeling and setting up automatic or default data labeling and data classification inside your environment. What does that mean? Maybe you set a default to say everything is internal only. Depending on the sensitivity of the data label that you apply to it, if you're like, hey, this is internal only and it has PHI data label on it as well, you may say there's only 7 people in the company or 2 people, or it has to go to this approval queue in order to remove this internal only classification if you want to send it internally. So there's lots of things that you can do in relation to setting up and controlling your document data. Again, look, at the end of the day, if somebody wants to egress stuff, they're going to egress it. It is very, very hard to stop it 100%. The objective here is to make the bar high, to make it harder to do in mass, and to detect early. I don't want anybody to think that implementing these things makes it to where someone can't do it. It's all about making it harder, increasing the friction.
Make it not as lucrative.
That's a good call. Not as lucrative is a great call out. Or you catch them faster so they get away with it a couple of times, or the impact is big.
I think one real quick to like step away from like the technology side of this, company culture, even for a small business, be caring for your employees, right? And they're less likely to gimp you.
I think what you're saying is maintain a healthy corporate culture.
Yeah.
People won't hate you and they won't rip you off. I mean, I would love that to be the case, right? But I think that helps.
Probably at least 60%. I'm going to go with 60% of the people who would be someone who would do something like that and be an insider threat would less likely do it against you if you just weren't a dick.
That number sounds high to me. Your 60% sounds high to me, Joel, because if you're going to embezzle or steal from a company systematically, there's more motivation there than you're a dick.
I use that as kind of a broad stroke, like really broad stroke, a 60% stroke.
I mean, certainly there's plenty of people that have direct personal motivations to be threatening, right? I'm not going to discount that. When I start thinking about how I'm trained as a person that has to do insider threat training for defense agencies that I support, they talk about threat indicators. And so, for example, brand new car, not inherently an indicator, but one that you stack up on the list. A brand new car and talking about how everybody at the company sucks and he hates it here and he wants a new job. Well, that's edging towards that. That's a little interesting. Not necessarily rising to the level of reportable yet, but definitely getting there. Now you combine those two things with somebody that has a new car, is complaining about the company, and is talking about their crushing sports gambling debt. If you're not reporting it, you're negligent.
Did you memorize like the DOT version? Because I feel like that is literally what they've trained me on.
Yeah, I mean, I've taken a lot of these tests. They explain those indicators, and I think that you talk about culture. Some of the culture is having some openness so that you notice some of these things. If you're very siloed and everybody's a robot, then you wouldn't know somebody had a new car. You wouldn't know somebody has distrust. You wouldn't know somebody that's complaining about the Eagles score because they bet entirely too much money on it. I think that culture is a big part of it, but not in the, if you have a good culture, you prevent threats. I don't think that that's true. I think it's if you have a good culture, you have enough transparency that threat indicators are obvious to peers, and peers can be trained how to notice them in a way that can't otherwise.
I will back off from my 60%. I think that is definitely a more educated response to it. I just went about that in a different way. You just broke it down to a more sensible way and understanding, like, you know your people. Like, you know the people you work with. You know, John doesn't come in at 10 o'clock at night, but he came in now. Like, that's one, right? Like, that seems like an odd thing to do.
Yeah. Depends. Some of the things I actually like is on the technical control side. I don't know the Google side as well here, but on the Microsoft side, you can literally control like login hours as well. So you can be like, this is the standard hours for this user that logs in. They only get to log in into that period of time. I would say, to your point, Joel, the base controls that are in there, when implemented properly and fully, which that's the biggest challenge I think in SMB, it is having the time, the capacity, and the technical skill to implement things fully and keep them implemented, to be clear. It's difficult to do. I'd say your wife is lucky, Joel, because she has her built-in security and IT person down the hall.
Lazy dude, like that's the worst. You tell her like, man, you want that software approved? Like you got write
That's
this.
hilarious.
You got to put this right.
You're an ITAM analyst background. I'm going to need a process for this software before I can approve it. That's awesome. I genuinely think, though, that one of the base things you can do is identity management. You talked about this early on, role-based access control. Be pragmatic. Sit down and spend the time to build some form of permissions model for your organization and then adhere to it and stick to it and audit it regularly. One of the things that I like is Microsoft's continuing to push things, features that allow you to do user access audits as well. That's where I would be starting, would be regular user access audits. If someone isn't using something or doesn't need something, take it away. Do not let access pile up over time from both a security perspective and an insider threat perspective. You want to keep the access minimal.
Even like if you're like just getting into it too, like enrolling your machines and then going in and to the cloud app and that catalog and just deny it all.
Yep.
You're small, you're still growing, you're still trying to figure out all the things that are necessary, and then go through procurement and be like, all right, what are the things that we purchased so far? From that, whitelist and like enabling those, and now you've already controlled your environment and sweeping strokes this time.
One of the cool features that I like about Microsoft data classification, data labeling, once it's implemented properly inside of your tenant, if you generate a Word document and you attach that kind of labeling to it, say I write it to a USB drive or I email it to myself and it's marked as internal only, even if I get it outside of the organization, if you revoke my credentials, that document is wired to go and check with Microsoft for access before it actually gives access to the tool. I've seen that actively work, and it will alert you when it happens.
Purview,
yes,
right?
Purview, thank you.
So that's the other move too. I know we keep focusing on Microsoft. I hated it in the beginning when they split security and compliance. I understand why they did, because now that they can drive focus in each of those products, now I mean they're going to sell it, sure. At least you're getting a more powerful tool potentially, but it's definitely in the old Microsoft fashion, which is going to have old antiquated things that you don't realize.
Did you see the new feature that Microsoft, it's a groundbreaking feature that the new Teams has? You can sign into multiple places at one time.
Wow.
Congratulations, Microsoft. Slack was doing that 10 years ago. About network segmentation. There are some very basic things that you can do to make sure as a business owner that your crown jewels are literally logically segmented from the rest of your environment. Users can't talk to other users. If a user can't talk directly to a server, require things like bastion hosts set up to get access to your most sensitive data. And then access to that is multi-factor controlled, fully audited. I would say the fully audited side of things, network segmentation, all those things, that's the prevention side. And from a role-based perspective, you layer that on top of it. Now you're getting into more of the zero trust world of the device you're coming from, who you are from an identity perspective, where you're coming from, all of those things. The more of that you implement and bring into play, the harder it is for an insider threat to hide. Well, hide and be effective. How are we defining SMB? We didn't even define that earlier on. That was one of my struggles because SMB can be Ursa, 100 people. SMB can be Joel and his doggy bar business.
Doggy bar business. It's not even...
I mean, to me, they're all small to medium businesses. I don't think that you hit mid-market, which is where I think you go after SMB until you're at least 300 to 500 people and at least 20 to 30 million in revenue. That's just my opinion. As we talked about previously when we looked at the NAICS codes and their various sizes, it's only a couple $1 million in sales for dog food to make you a large dog food manufacturer. To be fair, each can costs 50 cents, so $2 million in dog food is a shit ton of dog food. That's why there isn't a single good definition here. I do think that characteristically, SMBs have IT as a function. There aren't many SMB IT companies. I would call them startups. And I make that distinction because an SMB is a business that can be an SMB forever, right? Like they are a small to medium business that does the thing that they're going to do, and they will always be a small to medium business in doing it unless they franchise or open new location, like fundamentally just expand their business footprint. Whereas when I think about startups, I think about people whose lofty goals is to launch into mid-market from startup phase. Like there really is no SMB scale for most startups. And I say that because they're either big enough to sustain on their own income, which makes them mid-market, or they're living under the auspice of some investor or other patron, and then they're a startup. I think that an SMB is, and like maybe we're kind of that slightly different example, because I would say that we're not a startup in that we don't depend on outside capital. We don't depend on outside financing, the things that are typically a mark of a startup we don't have. But we're a moving SMB, right? We grow 20 to 30% every year. We will be a mid-market company in the next couple of years, if not sooner. That's why I think there's a bunch of axes that kind of make you an SMB that you can break. Number of people is one of them, amount of revenue is another, but then there's kind of this totality of circumstances test, which is to say, could you exist at your current size without outside money? If the answer is no, you're inherently a startup because you're living in a venture-backed world. If the answer is yeah, you could, you're just in growth mode and I have all these extra things and I haven't gotten to scale yet, well, then you might be a legitimate SMB with startup funding. I don't know that any of those things matter for our current topic. And I say that just because all of those people, startups or SMBs, are going to be under-resourced from an IT standpoint and are going to be and probably not have a full-time person at all, let alone a full-time person to do insider threat mitigation. It's going to be an ancillary responsibility of somebody in IT or in some type of corporate security role. So like if you're a defense contractor, your FSO might very well be your action agent on insider threat. It's also perfectly valid for defense contractors to put that into IT. If you're not a defense contractor, you probably don't have a full-time security anything. So it's probably de facto IT or somebody more in the corporate governance side, like a general counsel or a CFO or somebody along those lines. But regardless of where you've put that insider risk function, it's not dedicated and it is feeding in for both legal and IT at the same time. That's where I think if you aren't big enough to dedicate somebody there, you're in that SMB range. Because if you're 300 people in mid-market and it's not somebody's full-time job, you're probably not doing insider threat properly, right? There's a really good chance that you're at a scale where you're doing it wrong.
Just to be clear, it's someone's full-time job to do security, not full-time insider threat.
Full-time job to do security, of which insider threat is a principal responsibility. But yes.
Okay. Just making sure, because I don't think the interesting part is I do calls all the time, right, with Fortune 1000 companies, right, that don't have dedicated insider threat people. So,
but I would argue that they're doing it wrong, and they probably should.
Fair enough, agree. One of the things that I thought was an interesting point was you're like, a $2 million a year dog food manufacturer is a big dog food manufacturer, right? But the interesting part is it doesn't matter. The cost of a license to a small, mom and pop shop is the same as the cost of a license to a large shop. That is inherently the problem, is that cost remains static across all the spaces, right? Yes, you can get lesser equivalency licenses, right? Or fewer of them, and that does impact cost. But a GCC high license for one company is at E5 is $1,000 a year. It's the same as it is for another company, $1,000 a year. So if you want those features, those protections, you got to pay for it.
There's truth to that. There is, although the individual license cost is the same, certainly the total cost will depend on how many of those licenses you need. But I don't disagree with what you're saying.
The other thing I would say that's simple for, I think, SMBs that, to your point, are understaffed. That's the reason why I like Microsoft, is because in a lot of cases, you can set these policies and, air quotes, forget them. It's not something that has active maintenance that's in place, right? Once you establish your data classification platform and you establish the rules behind it, as long as you aren't going and tweaking it and changing it, it stays out there and it functions, right? It's out there chugging away, providing all the protections. So you implement it once and it is protecting you, for a period of time. One of the simple things is just join and mover leaver processes and making sure that you're deprovisioning people if they move around roles, making sure that you're absolutely deprovisioning access when someone leaves the organization. Those are simple things that can be done. So.
Yeah, I'd say thank you, gentlemen, both for taking the time today. I think I probably caused us to be a little behind on some of the questions we wanted to get answered, so we'll definitely schedule a part 2.
Sounds good.
Thank you, sir.